My key message today is this. One of the most important ways to create help, to create one family under God, is to make sure people are free to actually worship God. My key message today is this. One of the most important ways to create help, to create one family under God, is to make sure people are free to actually worship God. My key message today is this. One of the most important ways to create help, to create one family under God, is to make sure people are free to actually worship God. My key message today is this. One of the most important ways to create help, to create one family under God, is to make sure people are free to actually worship God. My key message today is this. One of the most important ways to create help, to create one family under God, is to make sure people are free to actually worship God. My key message today is this. One of the most important ways to create help, to create one family under God, is to make sure people are free to actually worship God. My key message today is this. One of the most important ways to create help, to create one family under God, is to make sure people are free to actually worship God. My key message today is this. One of the most important ways to create help, to create one family under God, is to make sure people are free to actually worship God. My key message today is this. One of the most important ways to create help, to create one family under God, is to make sure people are free to actually worship God. My key message today is this. One of the most important ways to create help, to create one family under God, is to make sure people are free to actually worship God. My key message today is this. One of the most important ways to create help, to create one family under God, is to make sure people are free to actually worship God. My key message today is this. One of the most important ways to create help, to create one family under God, is to make sure people are free to actually worship God. My key message today is this. One of the most important ways to create help, to create one family under God, is to make sure people are free to actually worship God. My key message today is this. One of the most important ways to create help, to create one family under God, is to make sure people are free to actually worship God. My key message today is this. One of the most important ways to create help, to create one family under God, is to make sure people are free to actually worship God. My key message today is this. One of the most important ways to create help, to create one family under God, is to make sure people are free to actually worship God. My key message today is this. One of the most important ways to create help, to create one family under God, is to make sure people are free to actually worship God. My key message today is this. One of the most important ways to create help, to create one family under God, is to make sure people are free to actually worship God. My key message today is this. One of the most important ways to create help, to create one family under God, is to make sure people are free to actually worship God. My key message today is this. One of the most important ways to create help, to create one family under God, is to make sure people are free to actually worship God. My key message today is this. One of the most important ways to create help, to create one family under God, is to make sure people are free to actually worship God. My key message today is this. One of the most important ways to create help, to create one family under God, is to make sure people are free to actually worship God. My key message today is this. One of the most important ways to create help, to create one family under God, is to make sure people are free to actually worship God. My key message today is this. One of the most important ways to create help, to create one family under God, is to make sure people are free to actually worship God. My key message today is this. One of the most important ways to create help, to create one family under God, is to make sure people are free to actually worship God. My key message today is this. One of the most important ways to create help, to create one family under God, is to make sure people are free to actually worship God. My key message today is this. One of the most important ways to create help, to create one family under God, is to make sure people are free to actually worship God. My key message today is this. One of the most important ways to create help, to create one family under God, is to make sure people are free to actually worship God. My key message today is this. One of the most important ways to create help, to create one family under God, is to make sure people are free to actually worship God. My key message today is this. One of the most important ways to create help, to create one family under God, is to make sure people are free to actually worship God. My key message today is this. One of the most important ways to create help, to create one family under God, is to make sure people are free to actually worship God. My key message today is this. One of the most important ways to create help, to create one family under God, is to make sure people are free to actually worship God. My key message today is this. One of the most important ways to create help, to create one family under God, is to make sure people are free to actually worship God. My key message today is this. One of the most important ways to create help, to create one family under God, is to make sure people are free to actually worship God. My key message today is this. One of the most important ways to create help, to create one family under God, is to make sure people are free to actually worship God. My key message today is this. One of the most important ways to create help, to create one family under God, is to make sure people are free to actually worship God. My key message today is this. One of the most important ways to create help, to create one family under God, is to make sure people are free to actually worship God. My key message today is this. One of the most important ways to create help, to create one family under God, is to make sure people are free to actually worship God. My key message today is this. One of the most important ways to create help, to create one family under God, is to make sure people are free to actually worship God. My key message today is this. One of the most important ways to create help, to create one family under God, is to make sure people are free to actually worship God. My key message today is this. One of the most important ways to create help, to create one family under God, is to make sure people are free to actually worship God. My key message today is this. One of the most important ways to create help, to create one family under God, is to make sure people are free to actually worship God. My key message today is this. One of the most important ways to create help, to create one family under God, is to make sure people are free to actually worship God. My key message today is this. One of the most important ways to create help, to create one family under God, is to make sure people are free to actually worship God. My key message today is this. One of the most important ways to create help, to create one family under God, is to make sure people are free to actually worship God. My key message today is this. One of the most important ways to create help, to create one family under God, is to make sure people are free to actually worship God. My key message today is this. One of the most important ways to create help, to create one family under God, is to make sure people are free to actually worship God. My key message today is this. One of the most important ways to create help, to create one family under God, is to make sure people are free to actually worship God. My key message today is this. One of the most important ways to create help, to create one family under God, is to make sure people are free to actually worship God. My key message today is this. One of the most important ways to create help, to create one family under God, is to make sure people are free to actually worship God. My key message today is this. One of the most important ways to create help, to create one family under God, is to make sure people are free to actually worship God. My key message today is this. One of the most important ways to create help, to create one family under God, is to make sure people are free to actually worship God. My key message today is this. One of the most important ways to create help, to create one family under God, is to make sure people are free to actually worship God. My key message today is this. One of the most important ways to create help, to create one family under God, is to make sure people are free to actually worship God. My key message today is this. One of the most important ways to create help, to create one family under God, is to make sure people are free to actually worship God. My key message today is this. One of the most important ways to create help, to create one family under God, is to make sure people are free to actually worship God. My key message today is this. One of the most important ways to create help, to create one family under God, is to make sure people are free to actually worship God. My key message today is this. One of the most important ways to create help, to create one family under God, is to make sure people are free to actually worship God. My key message today is this. One of the most important ways to create help, to create one family under God, is to make sure people are free to actually worship God. 아리랑.
There comes a time when you hear the certain call, when the world must come together as one. There are people dying, and it's time to lend a hand to life, the greatest scheme of all. We can go on pretending day by day there's someone
Yes, good morning. Happy to see you everyone today. I would like to sincerely welcome you to this historic first Think Tank 2022 forum. And today is indeed heart-stirring day. I'm TV host Jo Won-jung. I'm truly happy to be with you. So many people linked together around the world through this forum. What a historical day it is. The first Think Tank 2022 forum. It is an honor for me to serve as your MC. Did you enjoy the opening performance? Yes, the little angels who have been active at the forefront of the original Korean wave for 60 years since their founding in 1962 gave a stunning performance. Everyone, please give them another round of applause. Yes, thank you so much. Due to the COVID-19 pandemic, people still cannot easily meet together. Yet today, however, we're transcending time and space, connecting live to the three nations of Korea, Japan, and the United States. This forum features experts from various countries. They're all in different time zones, speaking different languages, yet they have come together to discuss and debate about peace on the Korean Peninsula. I believe this is a quite unprecedented and groundbreaking. True to tell, the current reality of the Republic of Korea, both internally and externally, is not so good. It is a very difficult situation. The rapidly changing international environment is increasingly characterized by conflict and division rather than harmony and coexistence. More than even before, we need unity and solidarity. Think Tank 2022 is a global association of intellectuals that was launched in May of this year. Think Tank 2022 is gathering experts and opinion leaders in the fields of politics, economics, religion, academia, media, and the arts. 1,011 from Korea and 1,011 from the rest of the world makes the total of 2022. These international leaders and experts are combining their wisdom and capabilities for the sake of peace and unification on the Korean Peninsula. That is the objective of today's First Think 2022 forum. Today we have former U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo as our keynote speaker. We have diplomatic experts from Korea, Japan, and the U.S. joining us, as well as other leaders from at home and abroad. Let's give a round of applause to thank all the participants for giving their time to this forum in the midst of their busy schedules. Thank you so much. Let us now begin the historic first Think Tank 2022 forum with a warm round of applause. Thank you very much. Now we will listen to the welcoming remarks of Dr. Yoon Young-ho, Chair of the Organizing Committee for this Think Tank 22 forum. Dr. Yoon Young-ho has been working very hard for the launch of the Think Tank 22 coalition of global leaders for peace and reunification on the Korean Peninsula. Ladies and gentlemen, let's welcome him with a warm round of applause. Peace-loving leaders and our peace associates, patriotic citizens who sincerely wish for the peaceful reunification of the Korean Peninsula. First of all, I warmly welcome you to this forum hosted by Think Tank 2022, which draws upon the combined wisdom of leaders around the world for the sake of heavenly unified Korea. The theme of this forum is, once again, let us offer another round of applause to welcome everyone gathered here today. Welcome! I would like to take a moment to express our appreciation to the co-founder of the Family Federation for World Peace and the Universal Peace Federation, Dr. Han Moon, who, with her vision for heavenly unified Korea and a world of peace, established this forum to vigorously pursue these aims. Let us offer Dr. Hak Ja-han Moon a round of applause. Respected peace-loving leaders from around the world, today the world is facing considerable challenges in areas such as politics, the economy, health and welfare due to the impact of COVID-19 pandemic that began in earnest in January last year. Globally, we are moving in the direction of division and conflict rather than harmony and mutual prosperity as national self-interest leads nations to adopt policies and trends that put their own country and citizens first. Especially when national self-interest takes countries beyond division and conflict and it escalates into confrontation and struggle, leading to war. This results in dreadful consequences that become a significant factor in hindering the realization of lasting peace in the world. Although we have a common heritage of starting the lesson of these painful experiences throughout our history, we are still packaging our self-centeredness as patriotism. Today, we take for granted division, conflict, confrontation, and struggle as a part of our everyday life. Is a unified world impossible to achieve? Is a world of harmony and coexistence impossible? Is it impossible to realize one world of lasting peace? Think Tank 2022 had its inception in the process of seeking answers to these questions and was launched to be a cornerstone of international unity and collaboration. In particular, certain problems set off in relation to the Korean Peninsula due to the struggle of hegemony between various powers coming to a head on the Pacific Rim have emerged as important issues affecting the world beyond the neighborhood of Northeast Asia. Although the age in which we live has the potential for the realization of peace, if we do not find the path of mutual respect and mutual cooperation for a better future, it is abundantly clear that a cyclone with extremely destructive power will arise. Dr. Hak Ja-han Moon proposes a fundamental solution. Through interdependence, mutual prosperity, and universally shared values, we can resolve the conflict and division on the Korean Peninsula. Dr. Moon explains that God is the heavenly parent of humanity and proposes a vision where states can not only solve the problems that plague humankind and realize a heavenly unified Korea, but also realize a world of lasting peace, one family of humanity under God, our heavenly parent. Leaders of the Summit Council for World Peace, the International Association of Parliamentarians for Peace, the Interreligious Association for Peace and Development, plus organization pooling the wisdom of economists, media professionals, and artists have worked to bring together a total of 2022 experts for Think Tank 2022. Its inaugural event took place on May 9, broadcast live by 483 state-run and private broadcasters in Korea and throughout the world. On September 12, Think Tank 22 brought together peace-loving leaders from around the world, such as former U.S. President Donald Trump, former Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe, former President of the European Commission Jose Manuel Barroso, and Cambodian Prime Minister Samdech Hun Sen, as well as many other prominent leaders for a rally of hope for the realization of heavenly unified Korea. Some 583 national and private broadcasters around the world carried the event live. It raised interest and support around the world for the peaceful reunification of the Korean Peninsula and a heavenly unified Korea. Respected leaders, this year marks 30 years since Reverend Dr. Sun Myung-moon and Dr. Hak Ja-han Moon visited North Korea and met with its leader Kim Il-sung to open the door to the reunification on the Korean Peninsula, which has been divided since the Korean War. With the support of the historic platform Think Tank 2022, Dr. Hak Ja-han Moon has gone beyond simply presenting an ideal and vision for unification. She has launched the Think Tank 2022 forum to be a platform where all all areas of society, economy, religion, diplomacy, national security, culture, media, and academia are discussed in depth to help formulate detailed policy recommendations. On this foundation, a new map for peace and reunification for the Korean Peninsula can be drawn by bringing together dignitaries and leaders from 157 nations that have diplomatic ties with the North and South Korea. It is in that context that we are hosting this inaugural Think Tank 2022 Forum for a Heavenly Unified Korea. Today, we take a step forward on that historic journey by welcoming the Honorary Mike Pompeo, who served as the 70th U.S. Secretary of State, as our keynote speaker. I believe that in his keynote address today, Secretary of State Pompeo, who was responsible for setting up the U.S.-North Korea summit that created the most important momentum to date in support of the peaceful reunification of Korea, will offer new perspectives and open new horizons with regard to Korean reunification. Mr.
In the Think Tank 2020 Forum for the realization of a heavenly unified Korea, I would like to convey the appreciation of Dr. Hak Moon, co-founder of UPEP, on behalf. 여러분,
ladies and gentlemen, let us express our welcome and gratitude to Secretary Pompeo with a warm round of applause. We also have with us Minister Kim Yong-chul, former South Korean Minister of Unification and Chairman of the Korea Institute for National Unification, who will offer his reflection on Secretary Pompeo's speech. Shall we welcome Minister Kim Yong-chul with a round of applause. Furthermore, we have 3 outstanding panels of experts from Korea, the United States, and Japan, which will permit some in-depth, intense, and candid conversations. From Korea, we have Honorable Shim Jae-kwon, former chair of the Foreign Affairs and Unification Committee, Honorary Lee Ho-jin, former deputy ambassador to the UN, Park Sung-hun, former director for training of the Korean Marine Corps, and Dr. Moon Byung-chul from the Think Tank 22 policy. From the United States, we have Honorary Newt Gingrich, Honorary Dan Burton, Ambassador Christopher Hill, and also Ambassador Joseph DiTrani. In Japan, we have former UN Secretary General for Disarmament Affairs, Nobuyasu Abe, former Ambassador to Australia and Poland, Hideaki Ueda, Vice Dean Noboru Yamaguchi of the International University, and former Defense Agency Minister Yoshinori Ono, who is also a special researcher for the International Secretary. Let us welcome our 12-minute panelists from Korea, Japan, and United States with a warm round of applause. Peace-loving citizens and leaders from around the world. In future events, we will welcome other prominent speakers such as former U.S. Vice President Mike Pence in the field of politics, former U.S. Defense Secretary Mark Esper in the field of defense, UN World Food Program Secretary General David Beasley on Food Secretary and Security, and Investor Jim Rogers on the global economy. We will explore the path to realizing a heavenly unified Korea, focusing on an agenda that embraces a total of 10 fields of expertise. I am convinced that this forum will help create a roadmap for the reunification of the Korean Peninsula. Once again, I welcome you to this historic Think Tank 2022 Forum. I hope we can be part of this noble and valuable initiative. Thank you very much.
네, 고맙습니다. 자, 다음은 싱크탱크 2022 포럼 기조연설 시간입니다. 오늘 기조연설을 해주실 마크 폼페이오 전 국무장관의 소개는 장관님을 누구보다도 잘 알고 계시는 뉴트 깅그리치 전 미국 하원 의장께서 해주시겠습니다.
Former Speaker Newt Gingrich served as a member of the House of Representatives for 20 years. He especially served as the 58th Speaker of the House of Representatives from 1995 to 1999, and he served as policy advisor to President Trump. Now, let's connect to the American studio. Let us meet the former Speaker of the U.S. House of Representatives, Newt Gingrich.
Let me first of all point out that since you can see the White House right behind me, you know I'm talking to you from Washington, and I want to thank Think Tank 2022 for allowing us to share some ideas and to be with you. And I, in particular, want to thank Mother Moon and the Universal Peace Federation for the work they're doing, both to try to unify Korea in a peaceful way, but also to bring peace and justice all around the world. And I can tell you from here in Washington that the Washington Times is a very important voice for the kind of solutions that the world needs and is a very big factor in trying to move America in the right direction. It's my great honor tonight, or today over there, to introduce to you somebody who has really made a remarkable impact. Secretary Mike Pompeo went to the military academy at West Point, graduated first in his class, served in the U.S. Army, went from there to Harvard Law, did extraordinarily well at Harvard Law, and in fact, Mary Ann Glendon, a very senior professor who had both President Obama and Secretary Pompeo in her classes over the years, said that Secretary Pompeo was without a doubt the smartest student she ever had. He went from that experience to Kansas, where he ended up as the CEO of an aerospace company in the private sector, learning how business works and being very successful at it. Then he went from there to the United States House of Representatives, winning a congressional seat and becoming very effective as a member of the United States Congress. He was then selected by President Trump to be the head of the Central Intelligence Agency, where he was doing a great job reorganizing and reforming the intelligence community of the United States. And finally, he was asked to serve as Secretary of State. My wife was the ambassador to the Vatican, and so I got to see the Secretary of State from the inside and to see the kind of leadership that he provided. All the lessons he'd learned at West Point, all the lessons he'd learned at Harvard, all the lessons he'd learned in running a business. And he was a remarkable leader, committed deeply to the issue of peace, of freedom, of religious liberty, and of making sure that those of us who believe in freedom are strong enough to protect it. So it's a great honor to be able to introduce to you Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, who's going to talk to you about his vision of what we have to do.
Hello, everyone. It's really an honor to be with you today. Thank you, Speaker Gingrich, for that kind introduction. You did such great work on behalf of the United States when you served as a member of the House of Representatives and ultimately led it. It was a blessing to hear the little angels today, too. What a great way to start our program. I, of course, want to thank the Universal Peace Federation and the Washington Times Foundation for hosting this important forum, Think Tank 2022. You serve an important function in building on peace. I'm told, too, that there are many high-level leaders with us today, including a few of South Korea's former prime ministers and foreign ministers, and many current and former members of the Korean National Assembly and Diplomatic Corps. Thank you all for attending. I just recently, less than 48 hours ago, returned from a trip to South Korea, a nation of friendship, which it is always an honor to visit. I especially want to thank all the faith leaders that are in attendance today. We need more bold leaders like you who aren't afraid to let their light shine in the public square. Of course, too, I want to acknowledge Dr. Moon, who escaped from North Korea just before the Korean War and is still as dedicated as ever to the peaceful reunification of the Korean Peninsula. Her vision of Think Tank 22, which is assembling global experts from Korea, Japan, America, and all nations, is indeed commendable. It's her lifelong dream to see a Korea peacefully unified. I understand that the 30th anniversary of she and her late husband, Reverend Moon's meeting with Kim Il-sung is coming in November, and that the Global Peace Summit on the peaceful reunifying of Korea will be held with the participation of 157 countries in Seoul early next year. Thank you, Dr. Moon, for such work and for building on peace. We're looking forward to the day when the Scripture reminds us, that the peacemakers are in fact blessed. Bless you, ma'am. America, too, is a land of peacemakers. The people of South Korea know that so well. The year was 1950.
UN forces comprised substantially of American soldiers were fighting to keep the Korean Peninsula free of communism. One of the units on the front lines was the 8th Cavalry Regiment, 1st Cavalry Division. A chaplain for that unit was Father Emil Capon, a Catholic priest from Pilsen, Kansas, my home state. On November 2nd, his unit came under a vicious Chinese assault. Father Capon rescued 40 wounded men in the face of massive enemy fire. This is an act for which he received the Medal of Honor in 2013. I was proud to advocate for that medal. It was so deserved. Father Capon was captured and taken to a Chinese prison camp. And for 7 agonizing months, Capon ministered to his fellow soldiers in that camp. In spite of hunger, disease, lice, and frigid cold, he stole food to give to others. He prayed for his men and for his enemies. And though Father Capon was dying of dysentery and pneumonia, he still mustered the courage to lead an Easter service in March. He sadly died 2 months later, his body thrown into a mass grave. Just this past spring, scientific analysis done on a once identified set of remains proved that they were in fact Father Capon's. On September 25th, his body will come home to rest in his home state and mine of Kansas. Sainthood in the Catholic Church is a real possibility as well, and I am so grateful that in July, President Moon awarded Father Capon South Korea's highest declaration for outstanding military service. America is grateful to have allies who recognize our sacrifices for peace. You know, Father Capon never made it out of his camp, but thanks to American liberators, prisoner 596, held in the Hungnam labor camp during the war, did make it out. You may know him better as the Reverend Sun Myung Moon. Indeed, after being freed, the late Reverend Moon spent his life for a laudable goal: one family under God. His wife, Dr. Moon, still holds out that same hope of that future today, and it's a big dream. It's going to take a lot of work and prayers to get there. And even if that goal sounds too ambitious for you, we can all agree we want mankind to live in peace and in harmony. Citizens in democratic countries like the United States and South Korea are blessed. We get to exercise our right to pray towards that end and work for the good of our fellow man. Sadly, not all of our brothers and sisters in the rest of the world share those liberties. My key message today is this: one of the most important ways to create one family under God is to make sure people are free to actually worship God. Religious freedom is crucial to peace in Northeast Asia and indeed the world. We worked on it hard for 4 years. Many of you know that we spent a lot of time on this. I met religious leaders all around the world to drive home the importance of standing up for religious freedom, from the chief rabbi of the United Kingdom to Pope Francis at the Vatican to leaders of the largest Muslim organization in the world in Indonesia. And I was proud to convene the largest human rights event in the history of the Department of State. Leaders, religious leaders from all over the world, coming together at the ministerial to advance religious freedom. It was a glorious event. But it was an episode connected to our diplomacy with North Korea that was absolutely the most memorable time during my 4 years. I myself know something about liberating those in prison for their faith. Let's go back to May of 2018. I'd been the Secretary of State for just a couple of weeks. President Trump asked me to go to North Korea to meet with Chairman Kim, to work on arrangements for the summit in Singapore in June of that year. I certainly hit the ground running in that job. In the course of my meetings with Chairman Kim, I repeated the President's request, indeed his expectation, that he release 3 Korean-American men who had been detained inside North Korea. Kim Dong-chul, Kim Hak-song, and Tony Kim were held in part for being men of faith. Now, thank God, I was able to return home with those men. It was a joyful scene on the tarmac as they were reunited with their families and their friends here in America. But other Christians inside North Korea are far from tasting that same joy of freedom. As those persecuted for their faith, they have a certain kinship with Reverend and Mrs. Moon. We know the atrocities that take place inside of that country. An estimated 50 to 70,000 people are in prison just for being Christians. One defector reported that a Christian woman became so ill in detention that she couldn't feed herself. And when she asked the guard a question, he beat her to death with a ladle. In another instance, a Korean Workers' Party member was reportedly arrested and executed in front of 3,000 people for simply possessing a Bible. What makes these abuses especially terrible is not just the unjust crushing of human life. It's also the jackboot suppression of religious freedom, the most fundamental of all human rights. America's founders knew. They knew how important freedom of religion and freedom of conscience is to a stable, prosperous society. The State Department's Commission on Unalienable Rights said it. It said it as a seedbed of civic virtue. I couldn't agree more. I was America's 70th Secretary of State, but it was our first Secretary of State, Thomas Jefferson, who once wrote, "Almighty God has created the mind free. No man shall be compelled to frequent or support any religious worship or ministry, or shall otherwise suffer on account of his religious opinions or belief." Indeed, Almighty God has created the mind free. And when societies respect that freedom, peace and harmony grows. It's inevitable. When people are free to talk about the most consequential ideas, societies can find the best way forward. When people see their neighbors worshiping peacefully, they gain tolerance for different viewpoints. When churches, mosques, and synagogues are free to engage in their neighborhoods, bonds of community are made stronger. And people of faith are quick to demonstrate it in their charity toward their fellow man. I think of the Christian organization, International Justice Mission, devoted to rescuing millions from human trafficking. Religious freedom creates blessings for the world, and America must always stand for it at home and abroad. And I'd urge each of you, all, to make the same stand in your countries. I also ask you today to contrast American respect for religious freedom with that of the Chinese Communist Party's soul-crushing deprivations. You know what I mean. We see brutal treatment of Falun Gong practitioners and Tibetan Buddhists. We read of churches forced to replace displays of the Ten Commandments with quotations from General Secretary Xi. We read reports of party officials recruiting children to become informants against their church-going parents. And of course, we all know the truth about the sickening genocide against the Uyghur Muslims in Xinjiang. Back in 2017, China began forcibly extraditing Uyghurs living in foreign countries. One of them was a man named Yusuf. He was living in Pakistan. One day he found himself being forced onto a one-way flight to Beijing. But by God's grace, the flight had a layover in Qatar. In what was likely to be his final hours of freedom, Yusuf posted a cry for help on social media. Amazingly, the State Department saw it. Our team there in Doha did excellent work with the Qatari government to keep Yusuf off his next flight to Beijing. We looked for partner countries where Yusuf could stay, even if temporarily. But sadly, no country was willing to cross China. They declined to take Yusuf. Time was running out before he would be on the next plane to Beijing. And so our diplomatic team sprung into action. We crammed what would have normally been a long vetting process for entry into the United States in just a handful of minutes. And as soon as we received permission from Customs and Border Patrol, a young, skilled American diplomat who worked in the Office of International Religious Freedom used her own credit card to book him a seat on the very next flight to the United States. A great story. Why is China so desperate to extend its long arm of tyranny abroad? As with all communist regimes, there's a strategy behind these evils. It doesn't want the truth of its brutality getting out. And the CCP cannot abide the idea that the Chinese people would find their identity or their meaning in life and in God. Party believers believe that the party alone should command the loyalties of the human heart. But little do they know. Little do they know that their suppression of faith is bound to backfire. Crippling religious freedom only creates more curiosity about faith and distrust of the regime. When China throws pastors in jail, prisons become seminaries. More suffering souls seek salvation from the CCP's oppression. So try as they might to crush religious freedom, the communist overlords in Beijing forget that no scheme of man can hinder the Lord's work. Let's also consider the CCP's aggression outside of its borders, so much of which happens right here in Northeast Asia. Make no mistake about it, China is a destabilizing force for the region. The list is head-spinning. China continues to turn a blind eye to North Korea's sanctions evasion. That behavior undermines the maximum pressure campaign that was successful in helping Chairman Kim come to the negotiating table with President Trump. Indeed, China has become more aggressive towards Taiwan. In March, the head of the U.S. Indo-Pacific Command, Admiral Philip Davidson, testified to Congress that China could invade Taiwan by 2027. I think that timeline is scary and accurate. It could, in fact, be sooner. This summer, the world discovered that China appears to be constructing approximately 250 new nuclear missile silos. What kind of message does that send to the region? And when a Japanese official recently suggested that Japan would come to Taiwan's aid in conflict with China, a Chinese official threatened a nuclear attack on Japan in just that scenario. All of this is just to say nothing of the CCP's cover-up of the outbreak in Wuhan, leading to a pandemic which has damaged Asian economies in particular and killed millions of people across the world. Look, we know countries around the world are considering partnerships with China. To them we say, look how recklessly China behaves even with respect to its closest neighbors. Look at China's imperialism over the South China Sea, Vietnamese waters, and the border with India. When it comes to accepting Chinese deals, not all that glitters is gold. Even the Taliban should keep that in mind as they try to lure China into launching the Belt and Road Initiative inside of Afghanistan. The CCP's ultimate goal is to be the biggest bully, not the firmest friend. We all know that. Now, as great as these challenges are, diplomacy and dialogue must always be the option of first resort to resolve them. Indeed, I'm encouraged that the UPF urges personal connections to try and make progress towards peace and reunification between North and South Korea. I'm encouraged that those two nations recently agreed to restore their hotline for regular phone calls. That's a good thing. I know firsthand from my time as Secretary of State that a personal approach is an outstanding asset for diplomacy. If I didn't personally ask Chairman Kim to free those three men I spoke of earlier, I'm not sure it would have happened. And the historic meetings between President Trump and Chairman Kim showed the power of a personal connection as well. In the end, we didn't get everything that we prayed for and that we wanted. But the first ever leader-level meetings between an American president and a North Korean leader ultimately produced an agreement from North Korea to denuclearize. This was the first ever leader-level commitment to do so. Those negotiations also resulted in a long moratorium on nuclear testing and the testing of their long-range intercontinental missiles. And when they can't conduct those high-end tests, their ability to gather data on what they have and how to improve it is reduced. The risk of accidents from those and the collateral damage to the peninsula is also reduced. And, as a matter of human nature, it's probably a whole heck of a lot harder to fire a weapon of mass destruction at someone you've shaken hands with. So we should always be willing to talk. But as much as dialogue and personal connections are helpful for diplomacy and peace, they aren't always sufficient tools to obtain the outcomes that the world must seek. China sustained dialogue with America for years while taking advantage of the United States and ignoring our legitimate grievances. Last year, I met with China's top diplomat, Yang Jiechi, in Hawaii, at his request. That meeting happened at a time when friction was rising between our two countries, largely because of China's lies over the pandemic. Instead of Chinese offers to mend fences, I heard the same tired calls to return to more dialogue. Look, for the Chinese Communist Party, dialogue's just a buzzword. It's their strategy to convince the other side to get bogged down in fruitless discussions and delay action so that the CCP can continue its lawless power grabs without consequence. Meanwhile, more than a year since that meeting, we've still not had proper transparency from the CCP on the origin of the outbreak itself. And the party continues to fail to fully uphold its commitment to honor the Phase 1 trade deal, as Yang said in China he would do when I met with him. My experience as Secretary of State confirms that peace also comes from strength. That's why the Trump administration imposed the maximum pressure campaign on North Korea. We restored pressure and military deterrence on Iran for the very same reason. It's the only way to stop the regime in Tehran from executing its violent revolutionary agenda against America, Israel, and the people of the Middle East. And on China? On China, we put in place new tough policy for the first time in history. America's Department of Defense strengthened our military presence in the Indo-Pacific. The Justice Department cracked down harder than ever on Chinese intellectual property theft and espionage. The State Department, we threw out Chinese spies in Houston and rallied more than 60 democracies to ban Huawei from 5G networks across the world. And for the first time since 1949, a U.S. presidential administration said aloud the last thing that the CCP wants its people and the world to hear. The party, the Chinese Communist Party, does not represent the people. These were the first turns of the wheel to turn around a big ship. There's so much more to do, but I'm confident that we solidified American security with our approach. Today across the world, and specifically in Northeast Asia, democracies must continue with clear strategies, strong deterrence, and powerful alliances. Under President Trump, Australia, India, Japan, and the United States got together in the Quad format for the first time in a long time. And we did it at the level of foreign ministers for the first time ever. Our countries had major differences to overcome in many places, but we got it done. And it is my great hope that South Korea and Japan can work through their differences and figure out how best to cooperate together. From my time serving as a foreign minister, I know both nations share the same goal of a stable and prosperous Indo-Pacific region. The region's security isn't served well by frosty relations between two of America's most important allies. This is one area I do believe that dialogue can absolutely and will make a difference. My country has a lot of work to do too. The Biden administration has continued the Trump administration's good work in the Indo-Pacific. I congratulate them for that. But the president's team are making a few dangerous moves that don't reinforce strength. I'm concerned that the United States is returning to the Obama-era policy of strategic patience 2.0. Choosing to firmly pursue neither pressure nor diplomacy will give Chairman Kim and his regime more opportunity to build out their arsenal and undermine sanctions. The regime seems to have restarted activities at the Yongbyon facility, and just a few days ago, North Korea claims to have successfully tested long-range cruise missiles. They're testing the world. They're testing the Biden administration to see how it will respond. And a strategy of strategic patience 2.0 will weaken our credibility with allies and partners throughout the entire world who want to see leadership from the United States. It says North Korea isn't a priority for us as well. If the Biden administration continues dithering, it will only give the regime more time to undermine sanctions. We know, for instance, that the regime is trying to exploit cryptocurrency to generate and hide illicit revenue. It'll try anything to pay for its nuclear weapons. And on this important issue of North Korea, we can't lead from behind. Second, the Biden administration should be downright embarrassed of the defense budget it submitted to Congress. We need more substantial increase than the 1.7%. We most especially need to strengthen our naval resources, which are critical to countering China in the Indo-Pacific and supporting our allies like the Republic of Korea. Instead, the Navy got a paltry increase in spending and a 3% reduction in the allotment for new ships. President Biden must stop misleading American troops that climate change is the greatest national security threat and start appropriating more money for America's defense. I hope Congress will send that same message. We need to continue strengthening our alliance with South Korea as well. As part of that effort, I'm glad that the United States and Korea military exercise went forward last month. That's really good news. Look, no matter what happens, the alliance must be prepared to defend the Korean Peninsula. Period. Full stop. Finally, unlike the Trump administration, the Biden administration gave Russia a clean, free extension of the New START treaty, receiving no concessions from the Russians. Meanwhile, they made no effort to address Chinese nuclear weapons, a big threat to the entire world and to the Korean Peninsula in particular. China shouldn't be able to increase their nuclear arsenal in a secretive manner. It's a clear violation of Article 6 of the Treaty on Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons, which clearly stipulates that the nuclear powers should undertake good faith negotiations. The Chinese Communist Party has refused to do so. Imagine the Chinese Communist Party with nuclear parity with the United States and how Beijing could wield that power to coerce free nations around the world. The good news is that everyone here has the capacity to speak up and push leaders in both Beijing and in Washington in the right direction. I'd encourage you all to do that. I know one of those cities of power will be more respectful of what other countries have to say than the other. And speaking of good news, I'll close on this note. We should never give up. We should never give up hope of peace and reunification. Indeed, those 3 men who came back with me from North Korea never gave up. Even in the darkest night of gloom, they were hopeful they would one day be together with their families together. I remember this night so well. When we got off that plane at Andrews Air Force Base in the middle of the night, it was an incredible scene. President Trump and the First Lady were there to greet them. And amid all the drama of the moment, one of those men slipped me an index card at the bottom of the stairs of the airplane, and I put it in my jacket pocket. When I got home, it was early in the morning. My wife Susan and I read the card. It was Psalm 126. The Lord has done great things for us, and we are filled with joy. I've kept that card framed in my office for the rest of my tenure as Secretary of State. You see moments of reunification are some of the most joyful moments we have as human beings. And as a Christian, I think that's because the idea of reconciliation and reunification is at the core of the gospel, as God welcomes us to himself. There's a divine authorship of even ordinary emotions. That night on the tarmac was certainly a joyful one, but it was just a foretaste of the joy that 2 whole nations will experience when the Korean Peninsula peacefully comes together as one. I hope that day is soon. I pray that it is. It might seem impossible, but as Jesus reminds us in the book of Matthew, with God all things are possible. Keep working hard at solving big problem sets. And most of all, keep your faith. If we do that, we'll be closer to being one family under God than ever. Thank you all for being with me here today, and may God bless each of you. I'm very much looking forward to our conversation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That was a precious keynote address that we should engrave in our hearts. Please, everyone, let's give former U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo another round of applause. Thank you. And now we have time to listen to some general remarks from former Minister Kim Yeon-chul. He is scholar and professor in Korean political science and foreign affairs, and he was previously head of the Korean Institute for National Unification. He served as the 40th South Korean Minister of Unification and is now chairman of the Korean Peace Forum. Please welcome former Minister of Unification Kim Yeon-chul with a warm round of applause. Good morning, I'm Kim Yeon-chul, who was just introduced. I'd like to take this opportunity to express my gratitude to Dr. Jahan Moon and all those who have made Think Tank 2022 possible. I'd like to offer my greetings to all the experts joining us today, both from here in Korea and abroad. Thank you, Secretary Pompeo, for your keynote address. I salute your efforts to improve the situation of human rights. In addition, I would like to thank you for your support and encouragement for peace and unification on the Korean Peninsula. Lastly, I would like to thank you for your detailed insights into the political situations of this region, the Korean Peninsula, and the Northeast Asia. I would like to briefly comment on a few points you raised. First, I will share a few thoughts about human rights issues. Everyone agrees on the universal importance of human rights. With regard to the human rights problem, I believe that practical and effective improvements are key. We all agree with the need for human rights, but I believe we need to reflect a little more on how we can improve them in a practical reality. Considering the particular conditions on the Korean Peninsula, I believe we need three principles related with human rights. My first point is that cooperation is much more effective than confrontation. It is important to note that changes in human rights policy in West Germany, while Germany was still divided between East and West. Human rights in East Germany significantly improved after a shift from a confrontational to a cooperative human rights policy. It is noteworthy that West Germany's new Eastern policy of change through reapproachment helped improve the situation of human rights in East Germany. 50 years ago in 1971, when Nixon announced that U.S.-China relations would be improved, there were a lot of arguments inside the United States that improving human rights in China should be a prerequisite to that. I think, however, we should be able to evaluate after these 50 years whether the change through a reapproachment has proven effective. Secretary Pompeo, of course, pointed this out, but I think the standards for improving the human rights situation are still insufficient. The relationship between national sovereignty and human rights is a sensitive and complicated issue in international politics. However, it is important to keep in mind that humanitarian intervention is justifiable when there is widespread consensus in the international community. We should also pay attention to the case of the abolition of apartheid in the past segregation policy in South Africa. At that time, the conditions for that success were supported by the broad consensus and participation of the international community. My second point is about a balanced approach. Social rights are just as important as the right to self-defense. With the UN Conventions on Human Rights, there is a need for a balanced approach between Covenant A and Covenant B. Whenever sanctions are implemented, flexible measures to deal with humanitarian crises are important, since sanctions inevitably lead to the possibility of such crisis. We therefore need flexible measures that will alleviate humanitarian crisis while focusing on the purpose of the sanctions. The expansion of the notion of human rights within the global community is a necessary consideration as well. The reality of the Korean Peninsula makes it important to consider concepts such as the right to peace and the right to development. My third point is the need for human rights policies based on human rights sensibility. I find Reverend Martin Luther King's speech important in that regard. Darkness cannot drive out darkness. Only light can do that. Hate cannot drive out hate. Only love can do that. Just as we cannot shake hands with fists clenched, there are limits to bringing improvements in human rights through violent means or methods that are themselves contrary to human rights. Second, evaluating the Hanoi Summit and the lessons it provides. As Secretary Pompeo noted, the 2018 Singapore and 2019 Hanoi summits can be evaluated as significant achievements in the history of the U.S. diplomatic history. I highly appreciate Secretary Pompeo's work to facilitate these two summits. At the same time, I believe we should be learning lessons from the failure of the Hanoi summit to help with future nuclear negotiations with North Korea. How fast denuclearization is achieved will be influenced by the level of trust. When this trust is high, it will certainly lead to limited levels of denuclearization. We must therefore consider how crucial it is to build trust. Following the Hanoi summit, North Korea has been developing its nuclear weapons capability. As Secretary Pompeo pointed out as well, North Korea has recently restarted its nuclear reactor in Yongbyon, as well as its radiochemical laboratory, which serves as a reprocessing facility. Additionally, they continue to diversify their transport methods. If the stalemate continues, North Korea will continue to advance its nuclear capability. Negotiations must therefore begin in order to stop such nuclear advancements. Denuclearization cannot begin until such nuclear capabilities are curtailed. Implementation is equally important as agreement. We should build trust through the implementation process. I would like to briefly comment on the U.S.-China strategic competition in the Northeast Asia environment. Strategic competition between the U.S. and China is negatively affecting the resolution of North Korea's nuclear issue. North Korea has chosen to become more closely tied to China since the Hanoi summit. Since then, North Korea-U.S. relations have stalled and inter-Korean relations have continued to deteriorate. To solve North Korea's nuclear issue, cooperation between China and the United States is essential. Looking back, the outcome of six-party talks in the early 2000s was also possible due to collaboration between China and the United States. Meanwhile, in the process of denuclearizing North Korea, China-U.S. cooperation will also be crucial to transform the ceasefire-based regime on the Korean Peninsula into a regime of permanent peace. In the event that the current strategic competition between China and the U.S. moves to the military domain, the Korean Peninsula may find itself trapped in arms race and in security dilemma. I believe that the ROK-U.S. alliance is a security alliance that firmly safeguards peace on the Korean Peninsula and a future alliance that creates peace at the same time. Secretary Pompeo, please continue to support the development of a sustainable and future-oriented U.S.-South Korea alliance. Thank you. Thank you. Please. Everyone, let's give another round of applause to Minister Kim Yeon-chul for his reflections. Thank you very much. Now it is time for conversation with our panel of experts. For dialogue and questions aimed at enhancing understanding of the issues raised in the keynote address, we have specially invited panelists who are seasoned diplomats from Korea and the US and Japan. I would like to briefly introduce our panelists to you. First, I will introduce the panelists from the United States. We have the Honorary Newt Gingrich, former Speaker of the U.S. House of Representatives, former U.S. Congressman Dan Burton, former U.S. Ambassador Christopher Hill, and former U.S. Envoy to the six-party talks, Joseph DeTrani. Please give them a round of applause. Next, I will introduce our Japanese panel. Joining us from Japan, we have former Minister of Defense Yoshinori Ono, former Deputy Secretary General of the United States in charge of disarmament Nobuyasu Abe, former Ambassador to Australia Hideaki Ueda, and Professor of International Relations at the International University Yamaguchi Nobura. Please welcome them with a round of applause. Thank you. Finally, I'd like to introduce the final panel joining us from Korea. First, we have former National Assembly member Shim Jae-kwon, Vice President of the United Nations Republic of Korea Association Lee Ho-jin, former Marine Corps Education Training Commander Park Sung-hoon, and Think Tank 2022 Policy Researcher and Chief Research Fellow Moon Byung-chul. Please welcome them with a round of applause. Thank you. We will continue with in-depth discussions with the panelists to go deeper into the content of the keynote address, and questions and conversation will follow. Firstly, each nation, Korea, Japan, and the United States, will engage in dialogue with former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo. Let's connect with the United States. I give the floor to the American panelists.
Let me just say that I thought Secretary Pompeo had a very impressive and very authoritative, and at the same time a very personal talk in which he brought in so many people whose lives had been changed, particularly by intervention on behalf of religious liberty. I'm very honored to be here as part of a panel with Ambassador Chris Hill, who has been working on Korean issues since the mid-1980s for over 30 years. His knowledge is far greater than mine about specifics in the Korean environment. And I just wanted to ask Ambassador Hill to comment on how he saw this and what his response was to the deep commitment to religious liberty that Secretary Pompeo made.
Well, first of all, thank you very much for those very kind words. And let me thank all the organizers, the Universal Peace Federation, the Washington Times Foundation, for putting together this extraordinary think tank 2022. These are important times. These are difficult times. These are times that an American writer, some almost 250 years ago, Thomas Paine, said, these are the times that try men's souls. These are very, very difficult times indeed. And I think it's a time that we all need to kind of pull together, work together, strengthen ourselves, and most importantly, have self-confidence in ourselves to carry the burden forward, because we must succeed in this venture, this venture of convincing the North Koreans that they will have a better future without weapons than with these weapons. But to the specific question that Mr. Gingrich has asked me, I cannot imagine a situation where we do bring North Korea closer when they have not made strides, important strides in the area of religious freedom. They clearly do not understand that. They clearly have regarded religion as a threat to their own kind of version of it, if you will. So I think it is very important that they understand that this is important to us. This is important to all of us. The need for a kind of universal values, the need to understand what freedom is, what the right to believe and what you want to believe, and ultimately, as Minister Kim Yong-chol pointed out, we need to consider human rights. This needs to be essential in the area of trying to deal with the North Koreans. This has never been just about nuclear weapons. Indeed, that's kind of a symptom of the issue. It's about a lot of things, and I think we can start with human rights and religious freedom. But let me perhaps at this juncture pose a question to Secretary Pompeo, because Secretary Pompeo was very modest in really not mentioning that he's one of the only senior Americans who's had the opportunity to sit down with the North Korean leader, a leader that has sort of wrapped in a mystery. We don't know a lot about him. We follow his health exploits. We hear things that he says, but we really don't know a lot about him. And what I would like to ask Secretary Pompeo is this a person, based on Secretary Pompeo's personal experience that many of us, or most of us, almost all of us, don't have, is this a person who can be an interlocutor in a negotiation? Because the fundamental problem, apart from the fact that the North Koreans have not agreed to give up these weapons, a fundamental problem is we don't even seem to have a negotiating partner right now. So my question is, can Kim Jong-un be that negotiating partner?
Well, Ambassador, thanks for the question. And thanks to one thought, your comment about having confidence, I think, is really important. In the end, those of us who believe that faith matters, those of us who are committed to Western ideals of property rights and liberty and freedom, we will prevail. And so thank you for reminding us all that we'll need confidence to successfully reunify peacefully the Korean Peninsula as well. As for Chairman Kim, I did spend a lot of time with him. I have respect for him. He engaged with us in a way that was logical, but he never was able to make the jump that you described, the jump that said that for his interest, the nation would be better off without their nuclear weapons than with them. As for whether he will ultimately be the person who makes that decision, I think there are lots of external factors at play. I think he's performing a very complicated calculus inside of his own country. With COVID-19, they have been incredibly challenged. The sanctions have had a real impact. He's trying to do the calculus to determine whether, in fact, there is a solution that would involve reunification that would put him in a place where he could ultimately see that it was the right thing to do. I pray that it will ultimately be Chairman Kim. He's a young man, likely to be on the world stage for quite some time. His sister, too, has taken an increasing role, and the two of them together, I hope, can find that place where they will see that peace is the right solution, that in the end,
a peaceful resolution to the conflict, which they continue to create, is the only way forward for the people in North Korea. I pray that he's the right fellow. He certainly has the intellect and capacity to be that person. The world will have to put to him hard decisions and pray that he makes the right one.
Let me, if I could, Secretary Pompeo, I want to follow up on part of your speech, which I thought was very affecting and very powerful, about specific human beings. I thought it was remarkably well done. But you also had, and you did certainly as secretary, had an enormously passionate, deep commitment to religious liberty as sort of the base of how humans ultimately are free. And I'm curious about something, because I know you've thought about this a lot. You've been in countries, North Korea, the People's Republic of China being two examples, where there isn't, not only is there not religious liberty, but the government seems so terrified of the existence of religion that they basically have to hunt down and persecute people who simply want the right to worship and the right to pray. And I'm curious, in your own thinking, as you've analyzed this, and you're one of the most experienced people of this in the world, what do you think it is that leads these kind of governments to be so frightened of religious liberty?
It's an important question. I've given it a lot of thought, but more importantly, there are a lot of people smarter than me who have given it a lot of thought over the preceding decades and indeed centuries. In the end, man yearns to have a relationship with his maker. And I think these government leaders fear that that relationship will get between them and the power that allows them to hang on to their kleptocracy, their authoritarianism, the things that permit them to have the power that they wield today. And I think they're just incredibly fearful of that. We worked on this issue in the Trump administration very hard. Your wife did amazing work in Italy, in the Vatican, on this very issue, because we knew it was not only the morally right thing to do to expand those people living in places where they can worship in the way they want, and if they choose not to worship, so be it. We knew that this was the morally right thing to do, but we also knew that it mattered for security and peace around the world, that nations that had religious freedom, where people had the capacity to worship in their own way, were less likely to go to war, were less likely to threaten other countries, were more likely to respect sovereignty and to develop communities that could actually deliver good outcomes. So there was an absolute moral imperative to this. And then there was a national security imperative for us to get this right. And I think those two things come together with leaders around the world who deny that freedom because they don't share that same morality. They don't value life. We saw this with the Chinese Communist Party, right? They covered up a virus that spread around the world because they didn't care about human life and sent planes to Milan with sick people with a very contagious and relatively lethal virus. This shows absolute inhumanity. And I think they know that a people free to worship, free to respect their maker, are a challenge to their continued grip on power. And we know, the rest of the world knows, that improving the outcome, making more people live in places where there is the capacity to worship in the way they so desire, increases the opportunities for peace everywhere.
Powerful answer. Very powerful. Chris?
Mr. Secretary, I think anyone who's had the privilege of serving in the U.S. government has a deep respect for what this country means, not only to Americans, but to our friends and allies. And I think nowhere is this more clear than with our ally, the Republic of Korea. I think I've seen the value of this very special relationship, of the value of this relationship with a country, albeit many thousand miles away, but a country that I think is very close in the hearts of the people of the Republic of Korea. So to look at a sort of broader scope in your capacity as the Secretary, it seems that the United States has been committed to Northeast Asia, has been there, has kept a troop presence, kept our sons and daughters there. And I think it's important to perhaps talk a little to the South Korean people, who are the broad audience of this telecast, the degree to which we are prepared through many administrations, Republican, Democrat, to stay the course and to be really present in Northeast Asia, and not just a country that will be thousands of miles away and talk to them from many miles away, but rather will be there. And I wonder if you can comment about the closeness of this relationship and how you see it going forward in the future.
As a young soldier, so many of my peers, I didn't serve in the Republic of Korea when I was in the Army, but so many of my classmates and friends did. They had a deep understanding of the greatness of the South Korean people and the South Korean military capabilities. And that relationship between our defense organizations is absolutely imperative. And I think America's commitment to all of Northeast Asia is reinforced every day by the fact that we continue not only to have the young men and women who are serving inside of South Korea proper, but those who are serving on ships that are offshore, the folks who are in the Pacific, working hard to deliver and provide real strength behind the words, behind the diplomacy that we execute in the region. I think you got this right, Chris. If we don't demonstrate that capacity to be dear, loyal friends and also strong military supporters of the people of the Republic of Korea, then all of the efforts that multiple administrations have made all throughout the past decades since the war, all of that will be looked at as mere words. That's not enough. It's not enough to secure American freedom. It's not enough to protect the West. It's not enough to demonstrate our commitment to protecting America through our alliance with the South Koreans. I am confident that every administration will see that in the same way, just as it has done for decades now. I think that this commitment is real and will be very, very lasting.
Thank you.
Yeah, if I might build on that, Mr. Secretary, as you know, I was Speaker of the House, and I personally believe from my own experience dealing with the Congress that the extraordinary majority in both the House and Senate would totally back doing what is necessary to defend South Korea and to defend Japan. I think that whatever the vagaries occasionally of White Houses or of the executive branch, the underlying deep commitment of the American people and the underlying deep commitment of the Congress is, in fact, to ensure that the people of South Korea, who are remarkable progress since 1950, and the people of Japan, who've had amazing progress, that both should feel that they have a permanent ally in the United States and that we would be reliable in a real crisis. But you might want to comment. I just think the Congress would be overwhelmingly supportive of that kind of approach.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I think that is spot on. That is absolutely true. I'm sure that Dan Burton would say the same from his time, his experience. I am very confident that this is not a partisan thing. We change from Democrats to Republicans and back and forth, but this commitment is American commitment. It's a commitment that extends more broadly than any chief executive or commander-in-chief. It extends to all the freedom-loving people who have chosen to serve in the House of Representatives, because I think the American people themselves can understand how important this is and would demand that their elected officials do precisely what you described.
Well, and let me just say, I think this has been a very important conversation. I'm delighted, knowing how busy your schedule is, that you would take this kind of time. I did think your speech was remarkably powerful and remarkably personal. With a little bit of regret, I want to both thank the Federation for hosting this and for allowing us to participate in Think Tank 2022. And I want to now return to our Korean hosts the opportunity to continue this dialogue and to thank them for the leadership they're showing and bringing together this literally worldwide conference and worldwide opportunity to have a conversation.
네, 잘 들었습니다. 제 미국 스튜디오 감사합니다. 네, 컨벤션 하원 의장님을 필두로 해서 정말 활발한 토의와 날카로운 질의응답이 이어졌습니다. 한미 동맹에 대해서도 심도 깊은 논의가 이어져 왔습니다. 자, 다음은
We will now give the floor to the Korean panelists who have joined us here at the Cheongsin Peace World Center in Korea.
마이크를 넘겨보도록 하겠습니다. 부탁드리겠습니다.
Gentlemen. Secretary Pompeo, thank you for your speech. I have specific prepared questions, but because of time restraints, I will deal only with the key points. At this time, the North Korean-U.S. dialogue has been suspended. I believe the primary responsibility for breaking this stalled situation lies with the United States, as the U.S. was responsible for the cessation of the dialogue. In the Singapore Summit joint statement, the two countries committed to improve relations, to establish a stable peace regime on the Korean Peninsula, and to work toward complete denuclearization of the peninsula. Of course, the simultaneous approach to these three propositions was prerequisite. Moreover, the day following the Singapore Summit, President Trump declared the suspension of U.S. joint military exercises with South Korea. It was a kind of response to North Korea's declaration of halting nuclear tests, intercontinental ballistic missile tests as a plenary meeting of the Workers' Party in April of that year. However, I don't think the U.S. has kept its end of the agreement. Of the items on the Singapore Agreement, the U.S. has prioritized the denuclearization of North Korea over improving U.S.-North Korea relations or building a peace regime on the Korean Peninsula. This U.S. has also not kept its promise to suspend joint military exercises with South Korea. It seems it's just downsizing the scale of the training. To resolve this stalemate, I'd like to suggest 3 action steps for the United States and hear Secretary Pompeo's opinion. First, I believe it is important to show North Korea that the United States is willing to act on the Singapore Agreement by suspending U.S. joint military exercises with South Korea, as former President Trump assured. If it is necessary to continue to perform U.S.-South Korean joint military exercises for defense purposes, we should still make an effort to suspend or postpone the exercises for now. I believe that the process of building a peace regime on the Korean Peninsula, North Korea, South Korea, and the United States can make an agreement on military exercise for the purpose of mutual defense. Second, I think one way is that the U.S. would simultaneously implement the 3 agreements in the Singapore Summit joint statement. I believe that compliance with the Singapore Agreement is the only way to achieve peaceful denuclearization and a peaceful regime on the Korean Peninsula. Third, considering the difficulties that North Korea has experienced due to the sanctions, COVID-19, and the flood damage, I believe that taking the lead in temporarily postponing or suspending sanctions that affect people's livelihood will also help resume the suspended dialogue between the U.S. and North Korea. I would like to hear respected Secretary Pompeo's comments on these issues.
Yes, thank you. As for the commitments that we made in Singapore and then following that in the negotiations that ran up to the summit that the 2 leaders had in Hanoi, we did make a commitment that we would not conduct major exercises. I think we lived up to that commitment. One can argue about the definition of major, I suppose, but we know that when we had conversations with the North Koreans in the aftermath of that, they seemed satisfied with the level of exercises that we were engaged in. And look, they'll always squawk anything that South Korea and the United States do, but in the end, they're conducting lots of exercises. I think what we did was deeply consistent with what President Trump had promised that we would do and would not do. And so we also saw that Chairman Kim live up to the commitments that he made in Singapore and after that as well. Second thought with respect to sanctions. We, of course, know that we don't place sanctions on food and, on medicine, or the capacity for the World Food Program to get inside of North Korea. I worked closely with David Beasley, the president of that program, to do our best to deliver food inside of that country. It was often, frankly, rejected by the North Korean leadership. They didn't want the United Nations in there or the World Food Program in there delivering food for whatever reason at any given time. So I have a view that says that the sanctions are the one tool that puts pressure on Chairman Kim to actually engage in dialogue. And so when the United States, following Hanoi, was prepared to go back to the table, you would have seen this in Sweden, you would have seen this elsewhere. We were fully prepared to continue to have the dialogue about the path forward with respect to the denuclearization of Chairman Kim and his country. They refused month on month to engage in that conversation. So we hit a period of stagnation in much the way it appears that the current administration is hearing that kind of period too. All this while the sanctions are in place. The other thought on sanctions is that the Chinese Communist Party has not been a good faith partner. These aren't American sanctions. Everyone needs to remember these are UN sanctions that are placed on North Korea. They got every vote from the Security Council, indeed, were passed with unanimity. And so these are the world's sanctions, not American sanctions. The Chinese Communist Party has consistently violated those sanctions provisions. They have permitted goods to travel to the regime, be pocketed by Chairman Kim and his fellow cronies, these people who are violating the human rights of the people, the peaceful people of North Korea. And the world has not imposed costs on the Chinese Communist Party for violating those commitments, not commitments that the United States made, not commitments that the United Nations made, but commitments that the Chinese Communist Party made. These were their promises. And so it is my judgment that the correct path forward is to continue to apply the sanctions, to continue to put pressure on this regime. We want to make sure that when medicine is needed or when food is needed, that it can get into the country, but that that food actually gets to the North Korean people and isn't resold in the black markets for the benefit of just a few inside of North Korea.
Thank you very much, Mr. Secretary Pompeo. I've listened to your speech very carefully, and it is really remarkable. Again, thank you again, Secretary Pompeo, for your very insightful and inspiring remarks on Korea. You have talked about the very crucial issues facing South Korea, as well as peace and security in this region, including China. And on almost all point of your reasoning and argument, I should agree with you. I appreciate them very much because I'm very confident that your thought should match your high-powered diplomacy under your leadership in the State Department some years ago. At this juncture, I'd like to take this opportunity to express my profound gratitude to the Universal Peace Federation for having me on this auspicious occasion, Think Tank 2022 conference. It is really my honor to join the very great group of eminent persons to address this daunting agenda for peace on the Korean Peninsula. That said, nonetheless, I would like to make a couple of comments and questions. First one is about China. You said, I quote, China continues to turn a blind eye to North Korea's sanction evasion that undermines the maximum pressure of sanctions. In my analysis, it is a big shift of China's stance on North Korea, quite different from the previous China leaders' position and their thinking on North Korea. When it comes to North Korean nuclear question, China had joined the strengthened sanction resolutions against North Korea. For example, in the United Nations Security Council, even early years of Xi Jinping presidency. Why do you think China, under Xi Jinping, had changed its stance on Kim Jong-un or North Korea? In this regard, I'd like to say that China's turning point happened perhaps sometime in 2018. As you know, the Xi Jinping didn't like Kim Jong-un very much, who killed his uncle Jang Song-taek, a crucial interlocutor for Xi Jinping and a plausible reformist in North Korea. But when Trump-Kim Jong-un summit was announced, January 2018, Xi Jinping might have been very surprised. At that point, Xi Jinping invited Kim Jong-un to Beijing to have a summit meeting between the two. Perhaps, in my mind, it is something to preempt the U.S. DPRK summit talks. For the, I have a second comment and questions. It's about U.S. You may listen to me, Mr. Secretary. It's about the U.S.-China relations. In my mind, decisive moment for the Chinese quantum jump in terms of economic and the military powers was laid out by the China's accession to the World Trade Organizations, which was made possible by the Clinton administrations. It has enabled China to make a great economic growth and further to invest in the military. Now, ironically, China has become the most formidable hegemonic power against the United States. China might have betrayed the genuine U.S. intention that China would become a democratic, liberalized member of international community. When U.S. suggested the G2 concept, G2 status for China, it was meant for China to be a responsible member of the international community. Quite long, U.S.-China relations were very cooperative. For example, President Jiang Zemin had accepted President Bush's request for China to rein in those Korean problems. It happened as you remember, in Crawford, Texas summit back in 2002. Since 2003, China had accepted to be a chairmanship of the so-called six-party talks. In that regard, China played a very positive role in negotiation of North Korean denuclearizations. It is no longer the case. Perhaps countries in the region rather began to perceive increasing threat from Beijing. In a collective way to cope with China's threat, the Biden administration would come up with perhaps pivot toward Asia 0.2, together with maybe strategic patience 0.2. After the complete withdrawal from Afghanistan, as you know, 2 days ago, Biden administration announced so-called AUKUS new defense security partnership between Australia, UK, and United States. Taken together, how do you assess this perhaps a newly reborn pivot to Asia 0.2? It will be working? Or what can you advise to the government of South Korea, current and perhaps future government, in terms of US-ROK alliance? My last question is about the still very illusory quest for reunification of two Koreas. It is crucially important for, first of all, for two Koreans, involving all Koreans, to work together to achieve this goal. But realities on the ground are quite different, quite disappointing. Perhaps lack of Korean wisdom, perhaps political confrontation each other. Here, I think international support and encouragement for the unification of two Koreas are rather needed, more important. The Dr. Hak Ja-moon proposed a kind of international summit to promote Korean unifications. How do you assess and how do you comment on this new, very powerful idea to convene international gathering, to convene the international summit to promote Korean national unifications? Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thanks for those insightful comments as well. There were a couple questions there. Let me try. The first was you asked the question about why the Chinese change their external posture, why they voted for these UN Security Council resolutions that place these sanctions on North Korea. You know, I think Xi was under enormous pressure at the time to be part of the global order. Everyone else, that would have been the outlier. Even the Russians were fully on board with this. And so I think he believed that it would have been very difficult for China to stand there and oppose those. Not that they haven't done that kind of thing before, but at that moment, I think he saw this in his best interest. He also knew that they could continue to play the double game that we saw them play. So while they signed on to the UN Security Council resolutions and indeed voted for them, they didn't enforce them with any unanimity. Indeed, they used it a bit as a rheostat to turn up and down the pressure on Chairman Kim. You alluded to this a little bit when the summit came into being. Each time, Chairman Kim was summoned to Beijing before that, so that he could pay fealty to General Secretary Xi Jinping and to hear from Xi Jinping about what his degrees of freedom might be. I suspect those were the topics of the conversation. And so our experience was that in the beginning of our time, in really 2018, the Chinese actually enforced sanctions regimes like they had not done before. But then they used allowing the bridges to reopen, allow transit to take place, allow more coal to be shipped and energy to be shipped in and out of North Korea through waypoints, through transition points, through offload points, in order to influence and make sure that Chairman Kim understood who was really in charge, who was really driving this, who the friend was that he, not the friend that he could count on, because there were times, your point's well taken, there were times he put real pressure on Chairman Kim, but the person that he knew could actually deliver him good things when he was in a time of need. So it was a complicated double game, and we saw them support the sanctions at the UN while undermining them on the ground and at sea all too often. Your second question is about how South Korea should think about the U.S.-China challenge. And I guess I would reframe it in this way. It's not a challenge between the United States and China. The debate, the fight, the opportunity and the burden that we all face is between good and evil, between an authoritarian communist dictatorship and the things that the people of South Korea know and love in a democracy with freedom. Those are the choices that I think the people of every country have to make. The people of the United States must make them. The people of South Korea must make them. The people of India and Australia and Japan, we have to make those choices. And I think the people in every one of those countries are going to choose freedom, and they're going to push back against this tyrannical regime. Your point about the WTO is absolutely true. We, the world, not just the United States, permitted China to enter the WTO on terms that permitted them to grow their economy on the backs of our people, to destroy jobs inside of our countries, permitted them to have no penalties for the theft of intellectual property from each of our countries. That transition, that WTO transition, was the thing that spurred the Chinese capacity for the Communist Party to consolidate its power over the freedom-loving people that surely live inside of China as well. And so it was a big inflection point. And so my ask for the people of South Korea and its leaders and the people all across the world is to recognize the threat that the Chinese Communist Party poses, to be thoughtful and strategic about how we respond to this threat, to do so with absolute fearlessness and to do so in unity. I talked about the Quad and the need for other countries to join. The Chinese Communist Party they're trained professionals at picking off one country at a time, right? Taiwanese dried pineapple and Australian wine, and the list goes on. Tourists in Palau, right? They are quintessentially good at using their economic might to impose costs on individual nations. But the West, the freedom-loving people, the big democracies, the big economies of the world, we have the power to together to build trade relationships, to build economic power as between ourselves, and deny the Chinese Communist Party that impose fear and costs on any one country. Last thought about reunification. I'd have to think through whether there was value in creating an international effort. I think each country has to make its own sovereign decision about how to proceed. But there should be no mistake about the objective of the American leaders for the last 70 years. For the last 70 years, the United States has valued the South Korean people, has worked tirelessly to provide security assurances for the South Korean people, but most importantly, to provide our heart and our diplomatic strength to try and find that resolution, to try and find the path forward for peaceful reconciliation of the Korean Peninsula. I hope every country will join that. And as we find alliances or groups that want to gather to work on that prospect, I think that should be encouraged everywhere and always.
네, Mr. Pompeo, 오늘
Mr. Pompeo, my sincere thanks to you for your participating with us today at Think Tank 2022, hosted by the Universal Peace Federation. I was particularly inspired by your views on the importance of religious freedom, its influence on human rights, and how it is linked to security in Northeast Asia and peace on the Korean Peninsula. As my allotted time is short, I would like to ask just one question with regard to peace on the Korean Peninsula. In his speech at the UN General Assembly, President Moon Jae-in of the Republic of Korea proposed the creation of International Peace Zone in Korea's demilitarized zone, the DMZ. As the name suggests, the International Peace Zone is a place where all nations can peacefully engage in communication exchange. Among international organizations, the United Nations is taking on such a role. If we were therefore to establish an international organization such as UN office in the DMZ on the Korean Peninsula, my expectation is that it would contribute greatly to bringing peace on the Korean Peninsula and in Northeast Asia and throughout the world. Looking at existing UN offices, we find there are offices in New York, Geneva, Vienna, and Nairobi. There is no international organization like a UN office in Asia, however. The establishment of such an organization at the DMZ would therefore create a venue for dialogue and allow the coordination of efforts for peace on the Korean Peninsula, in the Northeast Asia and the world. This is also the hope of the South Korean people. Therefore, my question is, supposing you, Secretary Pompeo, were the chief policy maker for the U.S., would you be willing to give diplomatic support for the Korean peoples pushing forward an effort toward the establishment of a UN office in the DMZ?
외교적으로 지지하고 지원해 줄 요인가 있는지 그 점에 대한 답을 듣고 싶습니다. 감사합니다.
I haven't given that direct thought. We should, if we begin to head down a path like that, we should make sure we understand its objective. And my view is, too, we all know, you all live this every day. We all know that there are deep, complex set of rules that govern that space today, agreed to a long time ago and honored mostly by both North and South Korea, right? A set of very rigid understandings as between the two countries. But if it were the case that a UN secretary in that place could deliver, could convince the North Koreans to engage in serious dialogue, and the North Koreans would understand that in the end, the objective wasn't just to have another set of dialogue so they could continue to build out their nuclear program, which is what I fear is Chairman Kim's short-run plan, to tie us all up in conversations, to have us have, secretariats and UN organizations talking in flowery language, all the while he continues to build out further his weapons program, not just his missile program, but the capability to conduct complex tests. And the risk to the world of proliferation from North Korea should not be underestimated as well. We know that the North Koreans have played games and transferred technology to other places in the world, and we have to make sure that we don't permit our desire for peace, our deep, unabiding commitment to delivering peaceful reunification, to give Chairman Kim an absolute free pass to continue to build out his program.
I would like to ask just one question. Secretary Pompeo, thank you for your in-depth keynote address. I would like to hear Mr. Secretary's opinion on the issue I am considering. Although I think that the Trump administration dialogue and pressure strategy has clearly paid off in South Korean and U.S. relations with North Korea, I believe it was insufficient to achieve the actual results we want to see. North Korea places a high priority on dialogue with the United States, and therefore North Korea tends to make light of the South Korean government's efforts for dialogue. I would like to hear from Secretary Pompeo what he thinks are the reasons of this attitude from North Korea and what measures might be taken to change it. Also, I would like to know your assessment of talks between Mr. Trump and Kim Jong-un and the specific reasons for the breakdown of their negotiations.
As we'll all recall, we often talk about Singapore as the launch point, but then, of course, Hanoi, and then, of course, the summit that was held between the two leaders inside of your country, in South Korea, and at the DMZ itself. The reason for the failure, in my judgment, was the absence of Chairman Kim and his capacity to see that peace with South Korea was in his best interest. To get rid of his nuclear weapons was in his best interest. He ultimately concluded that while he was prepared to make the promise that he made in Singapore, that he couldn't see the pathway. He couldn't see how he could deliver on that. And so your question was, how do we change this? How do we convince Chairman Kim? I think there are three things. One I've spoken about, that is we should have enormous confidence that we are right about the need for this denuclearization. I hear sometimes people make the case that we should just accept North Korea as a nuclear power. I think that is dangerous for the world. I know it is dangerous for the people of South Korea. So we should never lose resolve that the denuclearization of North Korea is an absolute imperative. Second, I think there is no substitute for pressure on Chairman Kim. What do I mean by pressure? I've talked about the sanctions regime that the UN has put in place. But we should also promote the pressure that can come from within North Korea. You all often have the chance to hear from or speak with people who have defected from North Korea. You hear their stories. These are lovely people, people whose families have been decimated, people whose religious freedom has been denied, people who simply wanted a better life for themselves and for their family and for their community. We should never forget that those people have a moral voice too. They have space, they have clarity, and while it is tamped down and they are imprisoned and they are even killed when they violate the precepts that have been laid down to them by Chairman Kim, we should never forget the pressure of 25 million North Korean people who love freedom and who desire to be out from under the jackboot of Chairman Kim, and who understand that those nuclear weapons make the hermit kingdom disconnected from the international system, and they know that it would be in their best interest if they were in fact gone, in spite of what the Communist Party in North Korea has told them for years, right? The North Korean leadership for now 3 generations has told its people that our security depends on these nuclear weapons. I think the North Korean people know better than that. And so pressure from within and pressure from without and resolve are the tools that will, I believe, ultimately lead Chairman Kim to make the right decision for the people of North Korea, for himself, and indeed for South Korea, the peninsula, and the world.
Thank you very much, Secretary Mike Pompeo. That was a lively discussion, sharp Q&A session. I think it is well known that the United States plays a crucial role in relations between North and South. We understood this well. We couldn't spend quite enough time on this subject. I'm sure we would have wished to talk more, but now I'm going to hand the baton to the Japanese panelists in Tokyo. Tokyo, please join us.
Thank you very much. My name is Yamaguchi. I was asked to moderate this part of the panel. Before asking my colleagues to raise issues and raise points and ask questions, I'd like to thank Mr. Secretary here for impressive and inspiring remarks. Thank you very much for that. In particular, for 2 points, thank you very much for showing your determination to defend Korea. That is very, very helpful for the Japanese. In this context, as an Army officer retired, I would like to thank many thanks go to U.S. soldiers, sailors, Marines, airmen, in addition to 600,000 young Koreans who are standing up against North to secure that flank. In that sense, Japan's western flank has been secured for nearly 70 years. Thank you. I really thank to this point. And another point is to Mr. Secretary is his point. Never give up the goal for peaceful unification. That is very, very strong message to us. And in that sense, after unification or unification process, harmonized efforts of U.S., Korea, Japan is essential. And I believe that we cannot be too soon to get started for preparation for that assistance. By that, I would like to ask my colleagues to ask questions. First, Ambassador Abe, please go ahead.
Thank you very much. First of all, I wish to thank for this organization to have invited me to join this session, very important one. I also wish to join all the people who have expressed appreciation to Dr. Moon and all the organizations who have organized this Think Tank 2022. I was very much impressed by the excellent speech made by the Secretary. I was glad to hear that he emphasized the issue of religious freedom and human rights. I support denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula and the reunification of two Koreas, denuclearization of the peninsula based on the Singapore joint statement. But very often, the question of human rights is pushed aside throughout the long history of our negotiations with North Koreans. They don't like it. They hate the issue. But in Japan in particular, we have a very pressing issue of those young Japanese boys and girls abducted by North Koreans and kept there for more than 30, 40 years. It is a pressing issue, time-sensitive issue, because their parents are fast aging and they are passing away from this world without having opportunity to get reunited with their sons and daughters. This is a horrible humanitarian situation. And I wish, Mr. Secretary, you can support making this humanitarian issue as a priority issue to be taken up in our negotiations with the North Koreans. That's my question.
Well, thank you for the question. I'm glad you raised this issue. It is an important issue. It's an issue that each time I met with my Japanese counterparts, Foreign Minister Kono, when I met with Prime Minister Abe, when the President met with Prime Minister Abe, this issue was raised with us, and we were asked to present this to the North Koreans. You should know we were faithful in doing that. Each time that I met with Chairman Kim, and indeed, I can say that in each meeting I was in with President Trump, he raised this issue. We know how important it is. We know how important it is to the Japanese people, certainly those directly affected, but to your nation even more broadly. But I think to your larger point, this is a central challenge of human rights with North Korea. It is so easy to simply talk about the nuclear challenge that we face from them, their proliferation risk, and forget the horrors of the human rights violations there. So please know, I'm glad you brought this up. I always raised it with my North Korean counterparts, with Kim Young-chol, with Choi Chan-wi, with Chairman Kim himself, with Kim Young-jo when I met with her as well. Each time we started a conversation. I know that my deputy, Steve Biegun, did the same. This was certainly a priority for the United States in working through the full scope of the challenges presented by the North Korean leadership, and we made it a priority to try and resolve it in a way that would respect what the Japanese people are ultimately deserving of.
Thank you very much for a good question, Ambassador, and very much encouraging answer, Mr. Secretary. Now I'd like to ask Ambassador Ueda to ask question.
Thank you very much. I would like to join my colleague, Ambassador Abe, to thank the organizer, given this kind of chance for me to participate in this very important forum. Secretary Pompeo's presentation was quite impressive and convincing, especially in human rights and religious belief aspect, which my colleague, Mr. Ambassador Abe, already mentioned. And so I'd like to ask rather practical sort of questions. Although already my old friend Ambassador Hill asked you so about the possibility of the talks with North Korea. So I'd like to ask a specific question. What about resumption of the six-party talks framework, that kind of framework which Ambassador Hill worked very hard? We know that now China or Russia and China are not much maybe interested in this resumption of this kind of framework. But as Ambassador Abe said, from our point of view, the participation of Japan in this kind of framework is very important to sort of achieve our goal, that is to solve denuclearization of Korea and North Korea, Korean Peninsula, and achieve normalization of Japan-North Korea relations, solving, of course, the question of these abduction cases. So I'd like to ask your comment on this kind of question. Thank you.
So two thoughts with respect to a broader set of talks, six-party talks, or a broader set of conversations. During our 4 years, we concluded that the most likely way to do this was a direct conversation between the leaders of our two countries, that this was different, we could break out of the mold. I know the model that had been used before, certainly by Ambassador Hill, a noble effort, and we simply came to believe, in part because we thought it made the most sense to be a good outcome, but second, from Chairman Kim himself, it became pretty clear to us that he wanted direct conversations, personal direct conversations with the United States of America, and he didn't want other countries to participate in that. I think he believed it was his best opportunity to get what it was that he was seeking. And so for our time at least, we didn't see that there was substantial likelihood of the six-party talks as a formal mechanism being a successful modality to deliver a good outcome. But second, as a practical matter, if you track my travels, if you track my phone conversations, if you track those of my special envoy and then ultimately my deputy, Steve Biegun, and indeed track President Trump's conversations with world leaders as well, we had broad conversations and consultations with each of those countries. When I would travel to see Chairman Kim, I would often stop either in Tokyo or in Seoul and meet with my Japanese and South Korean counterparts right after that. Or I would pick up the phone. I recall in the first time I picked up the phone and spoke by phone with President Moon. We would often stop in Beijing to brief the Chinese on the conversations as well. It happened less so with the Russians, but we always made sure that they understood. We did it with even a broader range of groups. I always would speak to the Australians and to the Vietnamese, and I would speak with the Singaporeans, each of whom has a place and a role and who desires reunification in the same way that I think each of us do. And so while we didn't have six-party or multi-party talks, we gathered in groups. We gathered at ASEAN and other places as well, where the leaders of those countries, at least at the foreign minister level, were present to have that same kind of conversation. And we just never got to a place where we thought that formal talks with those six countries at the table had a substantial likelihood of improving the opportunity for us to get what we believed and what we think the South Korean people ultimately will get.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Secretary and Ambassador Ueda. Now it's my privilege to introduce my super boss, used to be my super boss, Minister Ono, whom I used to work for issues with Americans to relocate Marinko Air Station, Futenma, to some other places. Minister Ono, the floor is yours.
My question is, first of all, currently in Northeast Asia, the Japan-South Korean relationship is getting worse. Behind this, there are historic issues and political situations. To change things for the better, we are trying to change things for the better UPF promotes the construction of Japan-Korea undersea tunnel. This project requires not only discussions of economic aspect, but also solution to the political challenges. How Japan and Korea overcome the difference of their political positions. What would you suggest to the leaders of both countries? This is the first question. And if I may, my second question is, well, I was born in Formosa, but what's the difference between two countries, Formosa and Korea, to Japan? What's your opinion on this? Thank you.
If I understood your first question correctly, I think I would do well just to reinforce the point you made at the beginning of your question, which is the tensions that we saw between Japan and South Korea during our 4 years were real. There were deep concerns from time to time. They became not only real and heartfelt, but very emotional. I could see it. It would flare up from time to time when a particular leader would make a statement that they didn't use the right language, or they got out of line. We had tactical issues over intelligence sharing and the like that were the fallout from this. Our effort always was simply to facilitate where we could, but encourage every moment. It is incredibly important, especially at what I consider this perilous time, with the challenges from the Chinese Communist Party and the continued build out of North Korea's nuclear capabilities. It is really important that it's not that this history shouldn't be honored and that Japan and South Korea don't need to work through this history, but it is very important that they see that their shared objectives far exceed any history that may lay behind them. The value of those two countries trading and working together and being good security partners together and amazing diplomatic partners together is really important to the people of those two countries, and it was always really important to the United States as well. And it's something we spent an awful lot of time trying to work our way through. Your second question, if I understood it right, was sort of the differences between China and Russia and these different countries in the region. Look, we ultimately came to believe that that Russia was a country that we wanted very much to find a foothold with, a path forward. It proved incredibly difficult because Vladimir Putin himself proved to be and continues to prove to be an incredibly difficult character to deal with. Not only the killings of people abroad, but what he's done to Mr. Navalny. He's still holding Americans unlawfully as well as other foreign nationals inside of his own country. And so in spite of our best efforts to build out a construct where we could begin to try and build a relationship with Russia, we weren't successful at doing so. We think in the end, we think that the détente, the rapprochement between China and Russia is ephemeral. We don't think that they share significant interests. They may share forms of government, but I think the Russians will come to see the Chinese Communist Party as a real threat to their way of life. That is, the Russian people will see that as well. I think every country has the task of making sure that we protect ourselves from the Russian nuclear threat, the threats of Russian cyber attacks, from Russia's efforts in Eastern Europe, all the while being mindful that we hope that one day that Russia will become a very, very different nation and that they will begin to work on these problems. If they, it may be too much to expect that they'll become a peace-loving ally, but that they will at least come to see that their interests overlap and that they can work alongside Japan and South Korea and Australia and the United States and Northeast Asian countries that want democracy and freedom and try and help us deliver against what surely must be something that they stare at as a global hegemon in the Chinese Communist Party that they also must fear.
Thank you very much. This part of time given to this part is already gone. So let me thank to Mr. Secretary by thanking him. My colleagues will join me in thanking too.
네, 잘 들었습니다.
Yes, thank you very much for the discussion. We connected with Japan and listened to the panelists' questions together with the moderator and to Secretary Pompeo's responses. He shared his thoughts about various pending issues, beginning with the interesting question of whether the six-party talks could be revived. Why, thank you once again. Now we are going to try to reconnect with the U.S. panel located in Washington, D.C. I will once again pass the mic to the U.S. panelists. Over to you.
Well, it's an honor being here. Secretary Pompeo, thank you for being with us. It's an honor chatting with you, and certainly thanks to the Universal Peace Federation and Think Tank 2022, and certainly Mother Moon for the Global Peace Conference initiative, 157 countries coming together to talk about global peace, how important this is, and thank you, Mother Moon, for doing this. Secretary Pompeo, I have great admiration for what you and President Trump did in regards to North Korea. I mean, I think back to the Panmunjom Declaration between President Moon Jae-in and Chairman Kim Jong-un. And that declaration, that is a powerful one, the Panmunjom, that spoke to peace and reconciliation on the Korean Peninsula. And that lent itself to the Singapore summit. And we all applaud that. We saw such great progress with President Donald Trump and Chairman Kim Jong-un. Transformation of a relationship, complete verifiable denuclearization, a peace treaty, and the remains of the repatriation of Americans who were lost in the Korean War. And now what we're seeing is a number of years where North Korea is not engaging with the United States or the international community. We recently saw the launch of 2 cruise missiles, long-range cruise missiles. Most recently, 2 short-range IBM, intercontinental ballistic missiles. No, I should say intermediate-range ballistic missiles. So I ask you this, Secretary Pompeo, you and President Donald Trump got so close to resolving these issues peacefully with North Korea, and we saw at the Hanoi summit where there was disagreement, where the North was not prepared to go the whole 100 yards. If you had to do that over again at the Hanoi summit, is there anything else you would do differently that could have continued that dialogue that was so meaningful? It gave us all so much hope, and you had such good progress. Is there anything possibly that could have been done differently during the Hanoi summit to keep that process going forward?
Ambassador Trani, it's an important question. It's frankly one I've asked myself and my team an awful lot as we return from Hanoi. Disappointed that we weren't more successful there, that we couldn't deliver for the American people and for the people of Korea in the way that we had hoped that summit would ultimately deliver. I don't know that there was much more we could do that day. I can't say everything about the conversations, but we believed when we traveled there, and we had told President Trump when we traveled there that we believed there was a real opportunity. We wouldn't have asked Chairman Kim. You'll recall he had a very long trek to get to Hanoi. We believe that there was a set of understandings. We don't think we misread them. We think there were things that took place on the side of the North where either they misunderstood or more probably there hadn't been full communication as between our interlocutors and to Chairman Kim. So there was a miscommunication because when the 2 leaders arrived, it became pretty clear pretty quickly that Chairman Kim wasn't prepared. To follow up on the commitments that he had made in Singapore in a way that we believed would provide the assurances that the North Koreans needed, that Chairman Kim needed to actually make that commitment, to actually execute on that promise. He wasn't prepared to make them that day. And so President Trump, in my judgment, and I don't think he had much room. It was certainly my recommendation to leave Hanoi in the way that we did. I don't think there was any opportunities for it to change in that moment. I wish perhaps that we could have done more to make sure that the North Koreans understood the expectations that we were walking into Hanoi with, so that Chairman Kim wouldn't have left there puzzled and disappointed in the way that I think that he did.
Yes. Thank you, Secretary Pompeo. Congressman Burton?
Well, Ambassador, or Mr. Secretary, you've taken a lot of questions tonight, and I don't want to prolong this. I would like to start off by just saying that 30 years ago, Mother and Father Moon went to North Korea and met with Kim Il-sung and talked to them about the problems facing the Korean Peninsula. And that's a dialogue that's been going on now for 30 years. And Kim Jong-il has just recently invited Mother Moon to come back, and I hope that that dialogue will bring about some positive results. The other thing I'd like to say is Think Tank 2022 is just one step that Mother Moon has been taking for years and years all over the world to bring about peace in Africa, in Asia, in Europe, every place. And I'd just like to say to her tonight, thank you for your efforts and thank you for Think Tank 2022. Now, my question, Mr. Secretary, is Afghanistan has turned into a nightmare for the United States. And the administration, in my view, and I served on the Foreign Affairs Committee in the House for 30 years, they haven't handled it very well at all. In fact, I think it's a mess. And so putting that into perspective, I'd like to ask you about, after Afghanistan, how we're going to deal with North Korea. Just within the last month, they've had 2 test flights or 2 test launches of a long-range missile. And that's in violation of the agreements they had when you were Secretary of State and President Trump was in office. So my question is, Afghanistan, according to this administration, has been going well, but it hasn't. It's been a nightmare. And now the administration is trying to deal, or going to try to deal, with North Korea. And the things that you and President Trump achieved seems to be going out the window right now, because immediately, just last couple of weeks, they launched 2 long-range missile tests. So I'd like to get your comments on, after Afghanistan and what's happened recently with North Korea, how do you think we should proceed, and how do you think the Biden administration ought to handle these issues?
Yes, an important question and a great connectivity. Representative Borton, Congressman, my friend Dan. Look, I think Xi Jinping watched how America handled Afghanistan in the Biden administration. I don't think there's any doubt about that. So there are operational and strategic issues, right? The Chinese now probably have a greater threat from terrorism in their Western provinces than they had before, because America is not there tamping down terrorism. I think they know that. But there's opportunity there now, too. They'll cozy up with the Taliban. The fact that the Taliban deny women their most basic rights, the fact that these are horrible human beings with massive human rights violations and blood on their hands won't trouble Xi Jinping at all. And so they will do their best to co-opt the Taliban leadership for economic gain, probably for some elements of their Belt and Road Initiative. But I think the Chinese will be very careful, too, in how they deal with that. They don't want to end up putting lots of their young men and women to fight and die in that place. And so it's a complex situation on the ground. But make no mistake about it, your greater strategic point is the one I want to focus on. They saw American weakness. They saw America's absence of resolve. They saw a horribly executed plan to withdraw from Afghanistan. And Chairman Kim would have seen this as well. And, you know, it shouldn't be lost that within a handful of weeks of the Trump administration leaving, the Iranians saw weakness as well. They fired their missiles from the Gaza Strip into Israel. Each time American resolve is tested and it goes unresponded to, bad guys, hoodlums, terrorists, human rights violators around the world will seize upon that. You served and saw how the Reagan administration responded when America and the world was challenged. He responded with strength, right? His central thesis of peace through strength is much akin to what we did with our America First foreign policy. We knew that the world was watching. And so when Assad launched chemical weapons, we'd said we would respond, we did. When Qasem Soleimani in Iran was threatening the world and threatening Americans, we made sure he couldn't kill another American. The world saw American resolve. They saw us build up alliances, 90 countries fighting against ISIS. The Quad built out, an alliance of Europeans in the Arctic working together to push back against Chinese aggression in the Arctic area as well. If the Biden administration doesn't follow that path, and they follow a path that is weak or appeasing or accommodating, bad guys will seize on this, and we will have more moments. There'll be more work done by Chairman Kim to build out his program. There'll be more terrorists conduct activity in different places around the world. And the Chinese Communist Party will feel free to roam about the cabin as well. These are dangerous things when America fails to lead and fails to work with its great friends like the people of South Korea, then the world is less secure.
Well, Mr. Secretary, let me just end my part in this program by saying I think you were an outstanding Secretary of State, and I think what you and President Trump achieved with North Korea, which is being changed right now, is something that we should look back on with great pride. So thank you for what you did. And with that, I will shift this back to North Korea, or South Korea, our friends in South Korea.
South Korea. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We were just connected to Washington. Welcome back to South Korea. Actually, one question just came in from Japan. A question the gentleman really wanted to ask but was unable to. So we will connect with Tokyo, Japan once again. If Tokyo is ready, please join us.
Thank you very much again. There is a burning question among us, which is on the Korea-Japanese relations, particularly political challenges between South Korean government, the Japanese government, the politicians. Particularly when we look at the fact that there is a plan, a proposed plan for Korea-Japan tunnel. We need to take every opportunity to have better opportunity, better relations with South Korea. In that sense, I'd like to ask a comment from Mr. Secretary about our idea of promoting the construction of Korea-Japan tunnel, undersea tunnel.
Yeah. So I'd say two things. In each of these places, look, we have rambunctious politics inside the United States, for sure. South Korea has rambunctious politics, Japan too. So there's an internal domestic dynamic. And what I hope happens is that in both of those countries, in each of those countries, in South Korea and in Japan, the people of those countries will come to recognize that they should put aside using history and conflict between those two countries as a political cudgel inside of their own nation. I think they should be unified in their understanding that a good relationship between those two countries is really important. You know, we take for granted the importance of the economic relationship between the three countries, the United States, South Korea, and Japan. We sometimes take for granted the really important diplomatic work we do. We think about it in terms of North Korea, but the work that these three countries have done solving humanitarian crises around the world, responding to challenges in Malaysia and Indonesia, in the Pacific Islands, the work that each of our countries has done alongside of each other is really, really important. And we should use every diplomatic skill set that we have. Every leader should make a central focus of their work. Every South Korean leader and every Japanese leader should make a central focus of their work to put those relationships on really firm footing, to begin to confront with great honesty the history between the two countries, and to come to a resolution that will satisfy them and their peoples that each of them was treated in a way that was historically fair and peaceful, and recognizing the fundamental rights of every citizen of each of those two countries. If we'll all spend time remembering the importance of our countries working together, then I think we can work through all of these legacy issues that have burdened that relationship for far too long.
Thank you very much, Mr. Secretary. We will do our best to follow your suggestion. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much. We were connected to Tokyo, Japan. They were curious about the undersea tunnel between Korea and Japan, and Secretary Pompeo gave a very good answer. Unfortunately, our time for question has ran out. Let's thank everyone, Secretary of State Pompeo and all the panelists in Korea, the US, and Japan who participated in this passionate question and answer session with a big round of applause. Young Koreans were asked for their thoughts on the reunification of Korean Peninsula. Standpoint. Unification is something I support. A unification process that recognizes both sides as separate states would be the safest and most efficient. As someone who cares about country's cultural heritage, I am in favor of unification. Through unification, the historical sites and cultural heritage of North Korea would fill the gaps in our history. Unification is something I support. The Korean people shared a common history before the Korean War. When I think of the families that were suddenly separated due to the war and put myself in their position, I am certain they are still longing for their family members. I am in favor of unification in terms of the economy. I believe the unification of South and North Korea will lead to more development. Unification would be good after I am neither positive nor negative about unification. A united Korea will, in its own way, have a positive impact and direction. It is understandable in a sense. Even if the unification never happens, I'm already living in the state somehow, so it wouldn't bother me much. Therefore, I do not have an extremely positive or negative opinion of unification at this time. I find unification rather boring. The importance of unification is always stressed in history classes in school, but why? I just can't see why we need to reunite. I don't mind whether Korea is united or not. In addition to removing the threat of war, a united Korea could serve as a major step toward peace in the world. If, however, we are unable to find a way to integrate North Korea's communist with ours, so to integrate the two Koreas economically, the burden will fall on the young people today and in the future. As a result, I am fine with the current situation. Unification is not for me. The reason I am reluctant is that I believe my generation as well as future generations will be forced to pay off the state debt, and I'm unsure of how we will afford the costs of unification. I am against unconditional reunification and unprepared reunification. We need realistic education, not abstract education on this. We need pragmatic education on unification policies that incorporate all three. I think negatively about the reunification of North and South Korea. In Germany, the cost of unification was very high. It is said that a lot of taxes are still being paid to cover the cost of unification. That was a video in which young Koreans expressed a variety of opinions on the reunification of Korea. It included both positive and negative opinions on the desirability of reunification. Some were thinking about the economic impact. It was good to hear that they would say. It is now time for conversation between the general audience. At this time, we will receive questions from members of the audience here who represent the citizens of Korea. There are many people here today, young people who have overcome much during these times are represented, and we will also receive a question from a North Korean defector. First, representing young people, we will meet Mr. Yoon Joo-hae, who is studying political science at Seoul National University. Hello, respected Secretary Pompeo. My name is Yoon Joo-hae, and I am majoring in political science and geography at Seoul National University. Mr. Secretary, I believe that the goal of reunification is not one of returning to the state of the nation before we were divided, but rather an integration of our two different systems into a market economy of free democracy, a national community that respects and shares human dignity and human value. Mr. Secretary, I understand your father immigrated to the U.S. from Italy around 1900. As an American living in a country with mixed cultural heritage, can you give us any advice on the national integration of the two Koreas?
Oh, that's an amazing question. Thank you for that. And it's great that a young person has asked such an important question about how it's the case that we can promote tolerance and freedom and accepting of people from different heritage and different cultures. And you did pretty good history. My family did, in fact, come over to the United States from Italy in the early 20th century. Look, America has been incredibly successful because we have people from all across the world come be part of our fabric, come be part of who we are as Americans. It's not easy, and it won't be easy for Korea either. People from different cultures, people from different places and different times and different histories all experience life in different ways. But as South Korea has demonstrated, a commitment to democracy, a commitment to allowing every voice to be heard, a commitment to accepting. And we saw this with the video of these young people. Different views, all articulated with intellect and logic, debated openly. This is the path forward. This will ultimately be the path. When that day, that magic day comes, when the wonderful day comes that we've all gathered here in Think Tank 22 to work on, when that magic day comes, I pray that the people of the Korean Peninsula will find it in their hearts and in their spirits to see each other as human beings, to see the humanity of each of us. And whether we had family that was in North Korea and some that was in South, or we were all from one particular place, everyone would find a path and become accepting. One other thought that a couple of the young people mentioned, and I appreciate this too, there are real costs. The people of North Korea have been starved. They've been starved not only of nourishment and food, but they've been starved of moral purpose and denied their capacity to know their families and to worship and to practice and grow their families in the way that they wanted to. South Korea is a wealthy place. It is a place with wealthy culture. It is a place with a long and extraordinary history. And I am confident that the world will help share this burden. And so I think we ought not fear the costs of reunification. I believe that the world will have the wealth and the resources, that when that day comes, there will be the capacity for peace and to build out all of the things that the people of North Korea will need, because for so long they have been denied so much.
Thank you for your answer, Mr. Secretary. In response to Mr. Yoon Jae-hae's question, Secretary Pompeo suggested that we make peace a priority on various fronts and to not worry too much about the expenses involved in achieving unification. Now we will accept another question. There are about 30,000 defectors from North Korea who have taken root in the South with new hope. To represent them, we will have Ms. Kang Nara give the next question. Hello, I am Kang Nara. I came to South Korea in 2015. Secretary Pompeo, you have actually visited North Korea and met Kim Jong-un. So I'm curious what your impression was. Also, I wonder if Secretary Pompeo, you think it would be good for the South and the North to be reunified?
I do. I pray that reunification, a peaceful reunification, will take place. It's the right thing for the Korean peoples. It's the right thing for the world. So I do personally have not only the belief that this day will come, but the prayer that it will come soon. Second, you asked about Chairman Kim. I get asked this often. You also asked about my impressions of North Korea. I didn't get to see a great deal of North Korea. When I traveled there, first as CA director and then as Secretary of State, I was flown in, ushered through the streets. I was shown what they wanted me to see. So I saw a North Korea that I know not to be the real North Korea. I saw the Potemkin village, not the horrors that take place in Pyongyang suburbs and all around the rest of the country, right? I could see that, they don't have electricity and power, and the basic resources aren't available to simply take care to feed their people in a way that allows them to grow and to prosper and to flourish. So I know this to be true in North Korea. It sounds like you likely know that as well. But I've also seen not only defectors who came to South Korea talk about this, the horrors that they experienced and that their families experienced, and the authoritarian regime and the pain that inflicted on them and on their families, and thus their desire to leave North Korea. But I also have heard the voices that prayerfully talk about the nobleness of the North Korean people and about their longing for Chairman Kim and the regime inside of North Korea to change its ways. And so I knew that it was our task, President Trump and our task, to try and lead the path forward, not only to successfully deny Chairman Kim the capacity to threaten the world with his nuclear weapons, but for us to one day try and deliver a better outcome for the North Korean people, for their rights as human beings, and for their capacity to prosper and to flourish and to worship. This is an arduous task. It's likely to be a long task, but it's not a task any of us should ever fear. And when I had a chance to talk to some of the people who had defected from North Korea, they implored us, they implored the United States to continue to be bold and robust in our effort to do that. And I was proud and privileged for 2.5 years to get to lead America's diplomatic efforts to try and accomplish precisely that.
Thank you very much. Again, indeed, several concerns and questions about North Korea and South Korea and their unification were brought up. I want to thank Secretary Pompeo for his precious answers and our young people for their thoughtful questions. Please also give a big round of applause to Ms. Kang Nara. So now, as you can see on the screen, we have viewers all around the world who have participated in this forum until now. So please let us send them a warm round of applause to everybody. Thank you very much. Please let us reflect on today's issues together. We have now prepared a totally different program, a peace performance. To celebrate our first Think Tank 2022 forum, Korean musical artist Nam Kyung-ju will perform for you today. He is a musical theater star here in Korea with exceptional talent in dancing, singing, and acting. He has earned popularity for his charismatic and energetic acting style. Everyone, please welcome Mr. Nam Kyung-ju with a warm round of applause.
Dream to fight the unbeatable foe, to bear with unbearable sorrow, to run where the brave dare not go, to right the unrightable wrong, to love pure and chaste from afar, to try when your arms are too weary, to reach the unreachable star. This is my quest, to follow the star, no matter how hopeless, no matter how far, to fight for the right without question or pause, to be willing to march into hell for the heavenly cause. And I know if I only be true to this glorious quest, when my heart will lie peaceful and calm, when I'm laid to my rest, and the world will be better for this, that one man, scarred and covered with scars, still strong with his last ounce of courage, the unreachable star. 감사합니다. Thank you.
Your Excellencies, respected leaders, ladies and gentlemen from all corners of the world with our shared desire for peace. I am happy to meet you. I'm musical performer and actor Nam Kyung-ju. Thank you so much for inviting me to be with you at such a distinguished event. I hope that today's Think Tank 2022 forum will be a significant first step toward blazing the path of hope for world peace. I myself will join you today in taking that path. Thank you very much.
When you're weary, feeling small, when tears are in your eyes, I'll dry them all. I'm on your side. Oh, when times get rough and friends just can't be found, like a bridge over troubled water, I will lay me down. When you're down and out, when you're on the street, when evening falls so high, I'll comfort you. I'll take your part. Oh, when darkness comes and pain is all around, like a bridge over troubled water, I will lay me down, like a bridge over troubled water. I will lay me down. Sail on, silver girl, sail on by. Your time has come to shine. All your dreams are on their way. See how they shine. Oh, if you need a friend,
You are with the first Think Tank 2022 forum, and we are in the final section. Today, centered on the keynote address of former U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, we have had a meaningful dialogue on peace and unification on the North, on the Korean Peninsula with experts from Korea, Japan, and the United States. Now, to wrap up, we would like to invite former Unification Minister Kim Yong-chul to share some closing remarks. Please welcome former Minister Kim Yong-chul with a warm round of applause. Thank you. First, I'd like to thank Secretary Pompeo for his detailed responses to each of the questions presented to him over a considerable period of time. Today, we have had several good discussions on very important issues such as the need for the religious freedom and human rights, an evaluation of the Hanoi summit, and solving North Korea's nuclear issue. China-U.S. relations and the situation in Northeast Asia, the need for cooperation between the North, the United States, Japan, and South Korea, and the importance of the U.S.-South Korean alliance. Many of the opinions had commonalities, but also many differences, I believe, in the importance of sharing different opinions and engage in dialogue. I think the value of harmony is most important in the process of building peace and unity and achieving that goal. Just as different musical notes can create a chord, I hope that our discussions will accomplish harmony in such a way. I would also like to extend my gratitude to Dr. Hak Jahan Moon as the conductor of this harmonic symphony, now and in the future. I was especially impressed by how smoothly today's Think Tank 2022 forum proceeded between our three countries, Korea, Japan, and the United States. I'd like to take this opportunity to extend my appreciation to Chairman Yoon Young-ho and everyone who made this event possible. In closing, I'm sure that everyone that attended around the world, including myself, has learned a lot today. I appreciate your participation. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Former Minister of Unification Kim Yong-chul gave his closing remarks. Thank you. I'd like to sincerely thank all experts and leaders from all walks of life, as well as those who have participated online for remaining with us through to the end. Former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, our keynote speaker, has participated with us to the finish, but we hesitate to let him go, right? Therefore, I will humbly ask him to say a few closing words. Secretary Pompeo.
I just wanted to say thank you. Thank you for hosting this. Thanks to Dr. Moon for putting on this important conversation as part of Think Tank 22. A shout out to the Summit on Peace in the Korean Peninsula that is being organized by Think Tank 22. It's really important work. Thanks to everyone who joined us. Thanks to the Universal Peace Foundation. Thanks to the Washington Times Foundation. You all are engaged in a noble enterprise. This effort for peace around the world, and indeed the unification of the Korean Peninsula and peace on the Korean Peninsula, is an important task. It is a moral task. It is a noble task. Please stay engaged. Please know that we are on the side of goodness. We are on the side of right. Thank you all for joining me here tonight. Thank you for giving me an opportunity to have a good conversation with so many people, not all of whom shared every view that I share. But I know that as we continue to dialogue, continue to talk, that we will deliver good things for the Korean Peninsula, good people for the people who live there, and peace and prosperity will be increased by the good works that we have done in these past few hours. Thank you for letting me be with you. May God bless each and every one of you.
Thank you so much. That was former U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo. Think Tank 2022 Forum for Peace and Unification of the Korean Peninsula has been a very historic and insightful occasion, and the series will continue. After today's first forum, please look forward to the second forum, during which we will invite former U.S. Vice President Mike Pence as the keynote speaker. And with this, we conclude the historic first Think Tank 2022 Forum. Thank you so much, everyone.